What's up guys, this is Desm101. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a few games I think are great to play on Halloween. Now, we're not going to be talking about the usual games of course, which I'm a huge fan of, and we all know about series like Splatterhouse, Castlevania, and one of my favorites, the Silent Hill series. But what are some other Halloween games that are pretty good, that are worth checking out? Well, I've got a list of some here that we can have a look at, and why don't you tell me what you think?
Alright, so we're going to start it off with a Japanese Megadrive game, Mamono Hunter Yoko. And this is actually based on an anime of the same name, which we did see in the United States, called Devil Hunter Yoko. And I actually did watch it back in the 80s, or in the 90s, but I didn't know that it had a video game equivalent. And so, more recently I found out about this game, and it's really quite awesome. Similar to Valis series, the gameplay has some unique mechanics, but overall the art style is pretty faithful to the anime, has some really fun gameplay, and of course a lot of monsters and devils. So I'll be straight with you guys, a lot of these titles are going to be import games, because of course the Japanese just have some really creepy horror stories out there that are great. Next is Getsu Fuuma Den, and this is a Konami game that plays kind of like a combination between Castlevania and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on NES, the first one. And it's the story of the demon world where this guy is one of the brothers who basically has a sword that has the power to stop the evil demon who's trying to take over the demon world. And it's got a few different gameplay styles, so you've got this side-scrolling, and you've also got some top-down kind of like Legend of Zelda style gameplay where you have to navigate on a map, and you have to acquire special items to beat certain bosses and to get past certain levels, so it's got an adventure kind of style of gameplay to it. Definitely a lot of fun, and from the best era of Konami games in my opinion. Alright, next is Mystic Defender, or the original Japanese game is Kujaku 02, which is another game that's based on a manga and anime. This one, you may have heard it, the anime called Peacock King, or Legend of the Peacock King, but it's basically about this type of spiritual priest kind of guy who has to combat the demon realm. So in here you're going to find a lot of really cool enemy designs, really neat bosses, very challenging gameplay. It's an old school title made by Sega, so it's a little frustrating sometimes, but overall it's definitely worth checking out. Up next is probably the best pinball table video game, Dragon's Fury. Now this was originally on the TurboGrafx 16 as Devil's Crush, but it received a change of name for this port on the Sega Genesis, and thankfully we had it come out here in the US. So it's pretty familiar to most people, it's not really unknown. The reason why I wanted to include it here is because of course it's one of the best pinball table video games, but also because people don't seem to know that it had a Genesis release, aside from the TurboGrafx. And of course you've just got tons of really great graphics and enemies, fun gameplay, and a perfectly creepy atmosphere for that Halloween vibe. Definitely check this one out. Now there was a sequel on the Sega Genesis called Dragon's Revenge, which wasn't very good. But on the Super Famicom in Japan, they got a release called and this is by Compile and Naxat, and so it has the same vibe as the previous games, Devil's Crush and Alien Crush, but here it's distinctively more Japanese mythology based. So you've got that kind of Oni demonic face there at the front, and some really neat looking like dragons and skulls. Very similar in gameplay and quite a lot of fun, although not quite as good as the previous entry. There's still those bonus levels which make it really great. Alright, and here's Maju O for the Super Famicom, also known as King of Demons. That's the translated title. And we didn't get this here in the United States because, well, there was no way it was going to pass the approval of Nintendo America. But wow, talk about a great, fantastic demon-themed game for the Super Nintendo. I really wish we could have had this game, and it's a joy to play nowadays. Very tough. You can actually switch into different demons after you beat certain stages. You get the ability to transform, and each of the demons has its own special abilities. So you have to kind of get used to the mechanics every time you beat a boss to figure out what's the best way to get through the next stage. Really fun game, great art style, super creepy atmosphere. Alright, next is Uninvited for the NES from Kemco, and it's quite similar to the predecessor games, Shadowgate and Deja Vu, in that it's a point-and-click style adventure. And I think that probably not as many people knew about this one as they did about Shadowgate, so that's why I wanted to include it here, because I think this game still holds up great in terms of atmosphere, and I can still remember the first time I played it as a kid, and just the sense of wonder that I felt wandering around and trying to figure out what to do, and just how creepy it was seeing all these different deaths, and just testing out all the different things that can happen in the game. And the logic and puzzles overall is a little tricky. I've only beaten it like once or twice. It's best to have a guide because it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what you need to do, but I recommend trying your best without a guide, and then if you get stuck, then just refer to it briefly, but don't go to it as like your main way of getting through the game, because you're going to find a lot of really interesting situations that you get into here. Definitely worth checking out. Next is Demon's World from Toaplan, the makers of Truxton and other shooters, as well as games like Snow Brothers. And this game is pretty much like Ghostbusters for the Sega Genesis, but with more of an arcade feeling. And you have some neat mechanics like a double jump and lots of different weapons that you can pick up to make this a pretty fun and challenging game. So it did actually see a port on the PC Engine CD, but this game is relatively obscure, and I only found out about it recently. But it is actually a lot of fun to try out. Okay, so here's another arcade game, Space Gun. And you're seeing it recorded here in MAME, which is where I recommend trying the game out. And I recall seeing this game when it first came out in the arcades and just being really impressed by it. And it was one of the first games that I recall getting to have a crowd around it while it was initially released, at least at my local arcade. And there was games like Operation Wolf prior to this, but no game really captured the kind of creepy atmosphere the way this game did. Especially as a kid, you step up and put your coins in here, and there's some parts where you're walking through these dark hallways and you hear the aliens coming at you, and you try to blast them and their arms fly off and their head blows up, but they can still attack you. It's a pretty frightening game. Very creative, and probably the best video game that captures the style of the Aliens movie. Some really cool lighting effects, and I like the art style a lot. And it just continues really well with the atmosphere as you continue through the game. There were some ports of this game for home computers, but From what I understand, it wasn't ported to any of the major home consoles. And last we have Toma Den as a bonus arcade game. Now this game is very similar to Getsu Fuuma Den, which we saw earlier, in that you're this kind of samurai ghost character in the world of the undead, or the demon world. And this one is a bit different in that there is this kind of big character side-scrolling mode. Looks like the Gladiator arcade game, and there's also a side-scrolling levels where you're the smaller character. But yeah, you can see it has a lot of stylistic elements that are similar to Getsu Fuuma Den. You got your top-down levels. Even though this story is technically different, it's about an actual historical figure, a samurai from feudal times in Japan. But overall, it's a pretty cool game to check out. I recommend checking it out in MAME. There was a port of this game to the TurboGrafx 16, which is quite similar. And we also, from what I understand, there was a version of the game called Samurai Ghost, as a more kind of westernized title. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for today. Tell me which games or what you would recommend for some pretty cool, obscure, creepy games to play. But thanks for tuning in, and have a good one.